The timing of this webinar could not be better. Why? Well, because we are in Clean Air Month, we're in Asthma Awareness Month, and this week is Air Quality Awareness Week. And if you didn't know those things, consider yourself aware now. Climate change and the pandemic, both are increasingly affecting business decisions, government policy/politics, and our daily lives. Public builders are following Wall Street and the SEC, figuring out new ESG reporting requirements. But meanwhile, homeowners are more aware that they need ventilation to keep buildings safe. So that means both the supply and the demand for healthy homes are going up. Now, we're not out of the woods yet on either of those crises, but one thing is clear. Moving forward, we're all going to need to pay more attention to healthy, efficient features and technologies in our homes. Now, Eric Werling is our guest today, and he's here to summarize the hard and soft trends in healthy home science, technology, and standards. Because we need to figure out where we are with the science of IAQ and healthy homes, ventilation standards and where they're going, and new and upcoming smart ventilation and healthy home technologies you should look out for. Otherwise, how will home buyers know whether their home is healthy? So, Eric Werling is our National Director of the U.S. Department of Energy's Building America and Zero Energy Ready Homes programs. Yeah, he actually picked up Sam Rashkin's old gig. Now, since 2011, Eric has worked with industry partnership teams and DOE national laboratories to transform building science knowledge and innovations into proven best practices for the housing industry, saving Americans $30+ for every dollar spent. How's that for ROI? And today, Eric's team is leveraging Building America knowledge and resources to help the Zero Energy Ready Homes program demonstrate healthy, high-performance homes and ultimately prove that net zero emissions homes are better and more affordable. Now, prior to his time at DOE, Eric served the U.S. EPA, where he launched the Indoor Air Plus program in 2009. And before that, Eric worked at ICF Consulting, where he helped the EPA and SAM develop and implement the successful Energy Star for New Homes program. Eric holds a master's in architectural engineering and an MBA, both from Penn State University, and a bachelor's from the U.S. Naval Academy. Now, I mentioned Sam Rashkin earlier, and for those of you who don't know him, Sam earned a national reputation as DOE's Building Technologies Office for his work leading housing programs that have partnered with thousands of home builders and resulted in over 1 million certified high-performance homes. Now, he retired from that agency a little over a year ago, and he's now solely focused on creating and teaching the content for the Housing 2.0 program. And that content is based largely on Sam's book, which Eric just happens to have. It's called Housing 2.0, a Disruption Survival Guide. The program empowers building professionals to design and construct higher performance, healthier, more sustainable homes at a fraction of the cost. And to learn more about that program, please visit www.greenbuildermedia.com/housing-2.0. Now, before we get to Eric's presentation, I need to make you aware of our sponsors. The first is Mitsubishi Electric. Mitsubishi Electric promotes sustainable building through the electrification of residential and commercial heating and cooling products. Their mission is to advance technologies that reduce waste output, promote sustainable resource cycles, while increasing energy efficiency and eliminating dependence on fossil fuels. Next is Westlake Royal Building Products. They are the North American leader in the innovation, design, and production of a broad and diverse range of exterior and interior building products, including siding and accessories, trim and molding, roofing, stone, windows, and outdoor living. For more than 50 years, Westlake Royal Building Products has manufactured high-quality, low-maintenance products to meet the specifications and needs of building professionals, homeowners, architects, engineers, and distributors, while providing stunning curb appeal with an unmatched array of colors, styles, and accessories. For more information, please visit westlakeroyalbuildingproducts.com. And finally, Schneider Electric is driving the digital transformation of modern homes with smart and sustainable energy solutions for ultimate comfort and energy efficiency. Their connected home ecosystem of smart energy management solutions provides digital control of energy use throughout a home, from the grid via their smart electrical panel to their connected wiring devices. This grid-to-plug solution makes it significantly easier to create smart, solar power and backup power-ready homes, both now and in the future. Now, if you have any questions during this conversation and presentation, please enter them into the questions box, which is found in the GoToWebinar control panel. I'm going to review those questions and I will ask them on your behalf. Now, Sam, I know you want to say a few words about Eric, so the floor is yours.
This must be my cue. Thank you, everyone, for attending. This is once again a case of me abusing really good friendships that I had. Eric and I go way back to the very first days I got into Washington, D.C. from my prior position in California. And Eric was one of the first collaborators I met with. We've had just a long, impressive run together. And over that time, I just have this amazing appreciation for just how thoughtful he is, how meticulous he is about his work, his just passion for all the subject that he deals with housing and health. And Eric sits at the perch of our nation's largest investment in residential health programs and research. So he's the best person I can think of to really bring to this series kind of the thought leadership about where health is going in the future. We cover it in a lot of detail during the workshops, but I'm just so grateful that Eric can join us and kind of take it to the next step. So enjoy, Eric. I think today there won't be a guitar. Is that right, Eric? No guitar?
That's right. Sorry about that, Sam. You got to put in the request early for that, right?
If you ever see Eric present live, I promise you probably 90% of the time there will be a song first, but here he is. He's real special. I hope you enjoy him.
All right. Thank you so much, Sam. And Mike, what a fun intro that was. I really appreciate that. I wanted to start with the question that Sam always challenged me and all of my other colleagues, all of our other colleagues at the department, which is, first, why are we doing what we're doing? The public has entrusted, you know, us with a mission to improve the housing stock with, you know, limited resources, et cetera. And you really just have to understand why you do what you do. And I'm taking another cue from Sam's book by showing you that, whoops, I went the wrong way. This is why I do it. Sam, in his first book, in his preface, he started out with, housing is personal to him. And it is to me too. And that's maybe why we've had such a long and you know, effective relationship together. This is a picture of my daughter and my first grandson, and you know, really this helps to show that it just sort of brings it home. That why do we want to build better houses? Well, we want to build them for the next generation. And why do we want to build cleaner, more energy efficient houses? The same thing for the next generation and the generations after that. So we can have both clean homes and a clean planet. So with that, I also want to show you a less happy photo. This is a picture of my grandson, my daughter and my grandson, Cal, in the hospital recently because he had obstructive breathing disorder, and that scared the bejesus out of all of us in the family. He was in the hospital for 8 days. Lots of tests, all sorts of challenges. And what it boiled down to was that it wasn't just one thing. He had COVID, yes. He also had rhinovirus, which is otherwise known as the cold. And it's also likely that he has asthma. So there you have it. The hospital had a hard time just controlling his breathing, et cetera, so that he wouldn't you know, it wouldn't get to a bad situation. But this was for our family a really, you know, sort of a wake-up call for health issues related to breathing. I mean, it's just sort of fundamental. And when you can't breathe, everything else is done. So with that, I also wanted to mention the two crises that Mike discussed in the opening remarks there real quick. The climate crisis is one of them, and the bad news regarding the climate is that this is straight out of the IPCC report that just came out. Most of those indicators are still going up. So we continue to increase the amount of greenhouse gases we're putting into the environment, and that could lead to some bad events down the road. Increases the urgency and increases the imperative that we do something to clean up our act. The good news coming out of that IPCC is that if you look at this graph, you can see that these are the adoption rates of several of the clean renewable energy technologies, and they're mostly going at exponential rates and have been for a long time. If you look at the photovoltaics, onshore and offshore wind, you'll see that in 5 years or less, those markets have doubled, and that doubling has continued over 10 years. So if that pace increases, we'll get from roughly a 9% market share for those renewable electricity generating sources, and we'll get all the way up to 40–50% in maybe a decade or a decade and a half. Good news. Keep your fingers crossed and keep working at it. The second crisis that Mike mentioned and that I'm thinking about a lot is with the pandemic, which killed almost a million Americans. It scared most of us and it changed our lives. That's the bad news. And there's my other daughter, who was scared throughout that whole thing. The good news about the pandemic is that we know a lot more about disease transmission. It raised our awareness across our society about IAQ and the need for ventilation. And for me personally, I've been focused on IAQ and ventilation in the context of high performance homes for 25 years. So to me, that was good news. That's why I put this in green font, because if it takes a pandemic to help people become more aware of the systems in our buildings that can help improve our quality of life, so be it. And I'm glad it happened. It also has changed our lives for the better in some regards. Those of us who are fortunate enough to have taken advantage of being able to do work from home find that we have more flexibility and sometimes more productivity than ever before. So both good and bad regarding these two crises, but I believe both of them are going to be sticking with us for a while. So future of healthy homes, I have in mind talking about each of those issues, the science, the technology, the standards, but I want to start out with a little soothsaying. What does the future of American homes look like? And I'm just going to get right to the punch. I think that zero emission homes will become standard by 2035. I have a question mark there because maybe it's going to be by 2030, maybe it's going to be 2038, I don't know. I also think Americans will continue to increase demand for healthier, safer homes. The more information that becomes available to consumers about the quality and the safety of their home environment, the more they're going to demand that solutions and standards protect their families, because after all, our families are the most important things that we have. Measured performance has been a real difficult challenge for us in the building arena for many, many years, but the technology is improving. Standards are slowly but surely improving, and I think the technology will enable us to make some of this performance measurement automatic over time, and that's going to be a game changer when it happens. Internet of Things and smart grid devices are going to continue to proliferate. They've been proliferating to some extent in the last 10 years, but they're going to keep going. They're going to get smarter and smarter. They're going to get connected to controls that can actually manage some of the problems that we have in homes, like maintenance issues, excessive energy use, comfort problems, indoor air quality problems, etc. And those devices are going to get smarter. There's no way that they'll get dumber. They will get smarter. We just don't know the pace at which they will. And then finally, I think once the knowledge base about what's actually happening in consumers' homes, once that becomes more available to consumers through their smartphone applications, through their thermostat that talks to them through their smart speakers, et cetera, sooner or later, people are going to want solutions to the problems that are becoming more transparent. So the solutions often have to do with preventative maintenance. So I predict that businesses will offer solutions that provide better preventative maintenance solutions and programs at financing or with financeable, affordable plans, et cetera. Think of it as HVAC service plans only actually delivering on the promise of better comfort reliably. So those are the things that I think are going to come down the pike with regards to housing over the next 10 plus years. And we've got a lot of indication that the pace of housing innovation has been picking up over the last 15, 20 years since we've been watching it closely. Consumers are demanding green and energy efficiency, and that includes the Indoor Air Plus label in there. That program is just about to reach 40,000 labeled homes, and the curve has been accelerating in recent years. Here's a graph I made that shows the two programs most near and dear to my heart. I left Energy Star off of this just so you could keep the scale at a reasonable level. But the Indoor Air Plus program, which has been around for 14 years, it has been growing at more than an exponential rate in the last couple of years. And obviously COVID probably had a lot to do with that. We can't prove that yet, but it seems obvious to me. And then Indoor Air Plus, the Zero Energy Ready Homes program at DOE, which requires Indoor Air Plus as one of the prerequisites, has also been growing at an amazingly similar growth curve to the Indoor Air Plus. Incidentally, the first 7 or 8 years of these two programs also looks a lot like the first 7 or 8 years of the Energy Star program historically. So here's some other things that I think are going to happen in the future. They're actually, some of them are happening now, but they're not happening everywhere yet. But these devices for detecting defects in buildings are getting more and more accessible, cheaper and cheaper. Sooner or later, everybody's going to be able to see the defects in buildings, and that includes buyers. The same will be true for indoor air quality problems and detected pollutants or environmental conditions that are unacceptable inside homes, and the devices are now cheap. There's a little bit of room to go on improving the accuracy of these devices, but they're cheap enough for consumers to own. So sooner or later, indoor air quality problems are going to be transparent as well, even if you can't detect it with your nose, which is the detection device that we all have. Some other trends that used to be invisible and are starting to become more visible, which is that buyers see the experiences of other consumers. And we start to see that, of course, in products. We're totally used to that now. Homes, it's also starting to happen there too. And then finally, one last issue about the future that I think is going to become more and more important is as we get better metrics and as we get better solutions for preventing disasters or preventing the bad outcomes that come from disasters in homes, we're going to get safer and safer homes. And here's just a variety of the issues that are listed. And the list goes on. So I think we're on the road to clean, healthier homes. I think it's going to take a long time before technology and standards, et cetera, bring it all the way. But we have seen progress, and it's going to continue to move forward. So let me talk a little bit about the science of healthy homes right now. First, we know a lot about what causes bad indoor air quality, and it really just sort of fits into three categories. Odors are those things that lead to primarily the perception of bad indoor air quality. Some odors, some things that cause odors are also in the second category, which is pollutants that can be detected, measured, and at high enough levels can be hazardous. And then finally, moisture, which is also related to some of the pollutants. So for instance, lots of biological contaminants that we find in homes can be controlled by controlling moisture. So water itself isn't a hazard or a pollutant, but if there's too much water in the wrong places, it's correlated with pollutants that can hurt indoor air quality. So we know a lot about those three categories of things that cause bad indoor air quality problems. So what about the contaminants and the science related to them that cause the most health harm? And this is a graph. I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but I'm going to just sort of show you this so that you understand that a lot of science has gone into figuring out what are the pollutants that show up most often and have been correlated with population level harm. And that harm is a bit of a complicated factor because it includes both death and non-death events like disability, etc. So all those are rolled up into this metric that we call disability adjusted life years, and that can be quantified and then turned into a dollar amount because the amount of years and the deaths can be associated with economic harm, etc. So this is a list that you see here of the major pollutants that have been associated with, that are found indoors, that have been associated with major population level harms. And the ones that come to the top of the list are PM 2.5. For those of you who haven't heard that term, that's particulate matter at the 2.5 micron size or lower. That's really small particles that stay airborne for a very, very long time, meaning days, weeks, months. Secondhand smoke is the second most harmful. Moisture and mold and all of the things that are associated with moisture are sort of categorized together and lumped into that third one. Radon, formaldehyde, and then these other three are sort of tied, acrolein, ozone, and NO2. Ozone comes from a few different sources. Nitrous oxide comes from combustion, like from gas cooking, for instance, or gas furnaces or hot water heaters, etc. They're usually pretty small levels, but even small levels can be harmful. And then acrolein is also related to cooking. It's coming from the heating up of the certain biological compounds in the food that we're heating up. So we also have well-established principles based on science, monitoring what the effects are of different measures that you can take in buildings, including source control and isolation, dilution by ventilation. That's where we come up with the ASHRAE standard 62.2 ventilation requirements, and then removal by filtration. And the prevailing wisdom today is that we should do all three of these, and we should do them in this order in order to minimize the risk of indoor air quality problems in homes. So here's a little bit more granular science. Some IAQ issues are getting better. This is some of the good news. This is based on a study in California of 70 homes that the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab did. And these are showing, HENG is just the nickname for the acronym for the study. The HENG homes were completed, their field results were completed in recent years. the California New Home Study was completed back in 2009. So there's a 10-year difference between these two, and you can see that formaldehyde emissions detected in the new homes in the Henge study were quite a bit less, pretty close to 60% or 40% reduction compared to homes built 10 years earlier. So there's a story there about removing or lowering the amount of formaldehyde that's allowed in the building materials. And so that's an example of source control that has actually affected the air quality for a good in new homes. So that's a great story. PM 2.5 has gone down. That's a more complicated story, and I'm not going to get into reasons there, but there's also some good going on there. And then NO2, those are so close that we sort of call it even and say we've still got some work to do there. But good news overbalancing the bad news here, in that new homes are probably better indoor air quality today than they were 10 years ago. So that's a good thing. Ventilation systems are becoming standard in homes. This is data from the California study, but we're also doing a similar study nationally with the Building America program, which will augment all of this data. And within about a year, we'll have data similar to this for 5 additional parts of the country. But what this is telling us is that, for ease of installation, the builders are by and large oversizing the ventilation systems, just because it's easier to install a larger fan than to try and find the exact size that you need for the standard. So that's good news that we have the capability to deliver ventilation in these new homes, which are tighter. We also have data about that. I'm not going to show you that. One of the problems, though, that has been detected in more than one study is that only a fraction of the homes, when investigated in the field, actually had systems that were running, that many of them had been turned off. So that's an argument for potentially developing better automated controls or sensing IQ, contaminant-based controls, etc. That could respond to the need for indoor air quality mitigation, etc. But it is something to watch out for. If we have ventilation systems that are capable of removing contaminants, but they're not being used, how do we do a better job there? Another interesting part of that study is that they looked at whether or not labels for the ventilation systems made a difference, and the answer is yes. Those systems that were labeled were much more likely to be on. So there could just be a lack of information going on that prevents people from using their ventilation. They just didn't understand that it was actually helping improve the indoor quality in their homes. Here's another aspect of the science that has been getting a lot of attention lately, that outdoor air quality isn't always good. In this case, wildfire is an example, and it's an important one because wildfire smoke events have been getting bigger and more frequent in recent years, and is probably correlated to climate change. So that's probably not going to get better anytime soon. So that we're kind of stuck with the fact that, especially in the West, but maybe in other parts of the country as well, we're going to have to deal with these kind of events where, so maybe outdoor air ventilation isn't the right thing all the time. Maybe we need smarter controls to help us to determine whether or not outdoor air is desired at the rate specified in 62.2, and if not, what to do about it. It does raise sort of a thorny question and issue, which is, what do you do when you've got contaminants both outside and inside that could potentially compete? Oh, I want ventilation. No, I don't want ventilation. in this case, for indoor contaminants and outdoor contaminants like wildfire smoke, one solution that can help with both is filtration and air cleaning. So, so a more nuanced strategy with better detection and controls is clearly needed, and some of the technology to move in that direction is being developed as we speak. I think this is the last issue on the science that I wanted to mention, which is cooking emissions matter, and they are nuanced. Just like the last slide, gas cooking does produce some pollutants, and sometimes they're not vented if people aren't using their range hoods, for instance. They include particles from combustion of dust and dirt, etc., in the air, CO2 and water vapor, and then NO2 and nitrous oxide and carbon monoxide are in small amounts also emitted from open flames. Electric resistance stoves, for instance, are not completely clean either. They are very hot, and so dust in the air can, ultrafine particles, etc., can be emitted because of the interaction with the stove itself. Induction doesn't cause as much of those kinds of pollutants. Both classifications of electric cooking produce fewer pollutants, but not none. And then finally, just heating up food itself produces some of the pollutants that, if not properly vented, can build up in a home. And it's not just odors, it can also be some of these pollutants that I showed on that earlier chart. Here's another, okay, I did add these slides. Here's another couple of studies that I think are interesting and worth mentioning real briefly, which is that there has been some analysis done on the potential impacts of smart ventilation. It can be, for energy savings benefits, and that can be significant. So balancing between energy savings and indoor air quality can be an important technology that we need. So look out for smart ventilation. And then there's also been some recent studies on the effectiveness of indoor air quality monitors. I mentioned those before. They're proliferating. I don't know how many consumers use them now, but we definitely know there's been an increase in their sales. And who knows what happens when people buy one of these things. They install them in their home, and are they complaining to their builders if they see something that they're concerned about? I don't know. So some research is needed there, but the accuracy of these things has been tested, and they are getting better. They are not perfect. There are some issues, like in particular, CO2 measurements can be inaccurate. Low-level carbon monoxide measurements can be poor, and then some of the VOC measurements can be problematic. But some of the other measurements, like particulates, which was at the top of the list, can actually be pretty accurate in these things. So they are getting better, and I would expect to see more use and more utility with these kinds of things. So here's a list of things that we still need to address. Note for Mike, if you're listening, I don't see our panels, so if you're giving me a visual cues, I'm not seeing them, and I don't know how to get it back. So I'm just speak up if you want to interrupt me.
No, we're all good, Eric. Doing good.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so back to the slide, more IQ science needed, and this is just my off the top. I mean, I got slides and slides and slides from the LBL scientists on what are all the things that we don't know that we need to do, and of course the National Lab scientists, that's their job, is to figure out what we don't know. and to make some progress. I boiled it down to this list that we need better data about what's happening with ventilation system performance over time and different aspects of maintenance, et cetera. We need R&D to develop better automatic fault detection and diagnostics equipment for both HVAC and ventilation systems. We need to understand better the interactions of the filtration and air cleaning technology and the HVAC central systems, et cetera, and how that affects exposure reduction from indoor air quality technologies. There's a lot of work to be done in making sensors and controls integrated into HVAC controls. We're really at the early stages of that technology development. Lots more work to do in lowering emissions of materials in construction. I think just measuring to understand what is the indoor air quality in smaller dwellings. I mentioned the indoor air quality study that we're doing for Building America around the country. Those are in larger single-family homes, representative of new single-family homes. And that's pretty encouraging that the IAQ in those homes is better than 10 years ago or earlier. But we don't have like multifamily homes and manufactured homes included in that sample set. So I think we need to study that because it's becoming more and more clear that the smaller, higher occupant density spaces are where the worst indoor air quality problems happen. So we need to study that sector more. And there's a lot of unknowns about low level and short duration exposure and the health effects of many of the common contaminants that I talked about. High level exposures are easier to understand because they're easy to measure. Low level exposures are harder. So here's a wish list for research. Don't hold your breath, but we'll get answers to some of these over time. So let's jump to the standards part of the equation. Where are indoor air quality and ventilation standards going? Here's a short list of things that are in the works for the ASHRAE standard 62.2 ventilation and IAQ standard. Better filtration requirements are likely, but not passed yet. So MERV 13 is my best guess about what will happen sometime in the next few years. It's currently at MERV 6. MERV 8 has been the recommendation in some of our indoor air quality programs, and like Indoor Air Plus, and that's also considering moving to a MERV 13, which is probably about the right level of filtration for new construction because it's associated with a substantial improvement in health-related filtration, and it can be manageable if designed from the get-go. MERV 13 can cause some pressure drop issues if you put in a MERV 13 filter for a system that wasn't designed for a higher pressure drop, but not all MERV 13 filters end up with a higher pressure drop. So that's a bit of a complicated issue, but I expect it ultimately to lead to higher filtration, higher MERV levels in the standards. Range hoods so far have only been in the standard in terms of what's CFM. And what we know now is that capture efficiency is not good for a lot of units, partly because of some of the units. It hasn't been a measurement that the manufacturers have been responding to. And because there haven't been any standards, now there are. And also because of installation of the range hoods. Sometimes they're not installed according to manufacturers' instructions, et cetera, et cetera. So I expect standards to address this set of issues now that we have a capture efficiency lab standard, and we can start to drill in on what's a recommended capture efficiency for a range hood. We are also seeing development of standards provisions that kind of allow for monitoring as a compliance path. For those of you who are familiar with ASHRAE standard 62.1 for non-residential buildings, they already have it. It's called the IAQ procedure. We don't have it in the residential standard 62.2, but it's being developed as we speak. We don't have any provision for outdoor air quality in the current standard, but I expect that to be addressed someday soon in the standards. Additional requirements for multifamily, in particular compartmentalization, which is the term we use for air tightening individual units to avoid transfer of bad air from one unit to another that's connected. Better approaches to verifying airflow of equipment. And then finally, there are some provisions in the standard for labeling, but we expect to see some improvements in clarification so that hopefully we'll start to see better labeling, which then we hope will lead to better use of the ventilation equipment. And then outside of the ASHRAE space, there's definitely a need for better standards related to what are acceptable emissions. There's a lot of confusion out there about how much concentration of different pollutants is okay for long-term exposures, et cetera, and differences in standards out there, like World Health Organization might have a different standard than the EPA. And so I would hope that we're going to see some improvement there, but that's a longer term. That's why I got a big question mark there. That's a longer term wish list item for ventilation standard improvements. Here is, just as an aside, but it's very interesting to me, the ventilation standards that regarding the kitchen and capture efficiency that I mentioned in a previous slide is actually being proposed as a California mandatory standard. And they have acknowledged that gas cooking releases more pollutants than electric cooking, so they've adjusted the capture efficiency requirement accordingly. This is a proposal. This is not final, but just to give you a sense that there may be some standards coming down the pike that would encourage electric cooking in order to help to improve the indoor air quality management through the standards process. I don't know how quickly any other jurisdiction outside of California would adopt this, but it seems likely that it'll be adopted in California. Okay, so low emitting materials. I just wanted to flash up this as a reminder that there's a bit of a history here in that I showed you how the most recent California indoor air quality study has led to some indication that formaldehyde emissions are going down in new homes, and that's really good news. And this is sort of a brief summary of the history of why we think that's happened. One is that California put in place a rule, the California Air Resources Board put in place a rule in 2009 that limited formaldehyde emissions in certain building materials. Then the US Formaldehyde Control Act happened in 2010 as a result, partly as a result of California and then a lawsuit for that against EPA to enforce the California standard throughout, nationally. Products have been labeled starting in 2018. So we've seen that product emissions regulation has affected the indoor air quality of the homes through that study. So that's an interesting interaction. It sort of reminds me of, I can remember Joe Stiebrick saying that we shouldn't increase ventilation rates, we should reduce the emissions of the materials. And here's a great example. I don't think Joe was saying California should regulate formaldehyde I mean, he might have been saying that, but he was advocating for something like what was done here, which is to control the emissions of the materials so that then we don't have to increase ventilation rates too high. And that's actually a pretty smart combination of policy. Now I want to mention a couple of issues that the standards are not currently doing a very good job with, partly because of just practical issues like this one. Supply ventilation is really hard to verify. So even though the standard says to measure the flow rate of the ventilation device, it's really hard to actually do it in the field. This is an issue we've got to do something about if we actually expect for supply ventilation systems to deliver the proper amounts of ventilation air. In-duct flows are also hard to measure. So there's another challenge that we have to deal with. Better labeling, I mentioned that before. Here's some examples of some bad or non-existent labeling and some good labeling. And so those are the standards issues and their evolution. Lots of unknowns there, of course, and as probably most of you know, the standards process is pretty messy because it's a consensus process where people with different agendas are arguing with each other about what the standard ought to be. I've been involved in that sausage making process for about 14 years now, and I've seen it all, but I still have high hopes for continual improvement. As slow as it seems to be, it still is moving in the right direction. So let's talk a little bit about indoor air quality and healthy home technologies. Smart ventilation is where I wanted to start. Here are just a list of smart ventilation and healthy home technologies to look out for. So if there's any need for or demand for air cleaners, looking for the certified air cleaners, because not all are created alike, and we're getting better at the certification and labeling of air cleaners. So pay attention to that stuff. Monitoring systems and HVAC systems to operate air cleaners when needed, to give advice to ventilation, to ventilate more in the case of, wildfires or other detected pollutants, et cetera. There are some solutions. I'll show you a picture of one in a later slide on simpler heat recovery ventilator solutions. That's an exciting area for me, and I've invested in one of my SBIR projects for a low-cost, self-powered, through-the-wall heat recovery ventilator. Potentially a game changer, we'll see. Smart ventilation controls that respond to outdoor conditions and time shift. These are things that I expect. The core technology exists, but the technologies, you can't buy them yet, but technology is getting closer and closer. And then what are the technologies that we can do to reduce the need for burning stuff inside houses? So that's kind of the list of the short list of the technologies to look out for that I expect to show up in healthy homes in the near future. Low-cost home IAQ monitors. I talked about this a little bit already. There are a whole bunch of things that they purport to measure. Some of them they do well. Some of them they need some work. There's at least one product on the market that actually measures outdoor air and sends a control signal to the ventilation system itself. There are some questions about whether or not that can do a very good job of it, but the technology exists currently to do pollutant-based, sensing real-time ventilation system control. So be on the lookout for more products like that, and hopefully they'll get better. Similar type of thing is available for in-duct measurement of the quality of the air that's getting pushed through the HVAC system after the filters, et cetera. So detecting contaminants, this technology, this particular one, only sends a signal if it detects something bad. It doesn't actually control anything yet, but I expect that to change over time. There's a smart range hood that was developed by one of the Building America partners, Newport Partners, in conjunction with the largest fan manufacturer in the U.S., Newtone, and I'm expecting them to release their smart range hood later this year for commercial availability at a medium price point. So that's pretty exciting. Has quiet operation, energy efficiency, automatic operation. It turns on when it detects that cooking's happening. So the occupant, and it ratchets up depending on how much of a cooking event is happening. So if it's just, a small, if it's not a big event that's happening, then it's not going to come on at full speed, and the consumer's homeowner is going to be less likely to turn it off, et cetera. And then, of course, high capture efficiency is built into the design of this thing. So a lot of folks are excited about that. I got a huge number of hits when I published this one on LinkedIn recently. And here's a few other projects that I'm currently working with. These are further down the line. These are small businesses that are doing research to improve different aspects of indoor air quality in healthy homes. This is a better membrane for energy recovery ventilators that it's very close to commercialization. It has the potential to improve the latent recovery efficiency of ERVs by 30% or better without increasing the cost of the ERVs. And that's a huge deal, especially for hot and humid climates. So be on the lookout. There's a few of the major manufacturers of ERVs who are in talks with Aspen Products Group with this technology, and I think it's getting close, crossing fingers. Here is a early concept photo depiction of that modular ERV, or it can come in an HRV, which is just through the wall. They have one of these prototypes with a small PV panel on the side that self-powers it, so you don't have to wire it, which could be useful for retrofit applications. Low cost, ductless, just plug it in and it runs with wireless controls. That could be a game changer, especially for the smaller units like manufactured houses, multifamily units, etc. And these can theoretically, the prototypes they're working on it can theoretically talk to each other, so you could have more than one operating in supply mode while the other's operating in exhaust or whatever. So this is a pretty cool technology. For those of you who've looked at through the wall ventilation systems, this is comparable to the Lunos system that is available in Europe, but it's at a price point that's something like 30 to 40% of the Lunos. So I'm excited about this when it gets ready, but it's probably a couple of years out. And then finally, another one I'm excited about, and this is a subtle development, but it's prototyping, testing, and hopefully commercializing a low-cost airflow sensor that would make it possible to do the commissioning of ventilation systems without those problems, without that difficulty of reaching the inlets or outlets of the equipment. And that's being developed with a partner called Ventomatic. So those are the technologies that I'm excited about moving forward, that we can look forward to in healthier homes. And then finally, awareness is going to be an important part of the equation. And I didn't really have much time in today's program to get into a lot of this, but I just wanted to call attention to the need for more awareness, and then show you an example of how awareness has increased in recent years because of what's going on. The COVID crisis has basically led to an increased demand for high MERV filtration. Those guys can't produce MERV 13 filters as fast as they're selling. I don't know if you've tried to buy a MERV 13 filter lately, but if you have, you'll attest to that. Portable air cleaner sales are going through the roof as well, and ventilation systems and products are doing just fine. So I think that the demand for these products relates to an increased awareness of the issues and how it affects the health of occupants in homes. So sort of a question, how will home buyers know whether the home is healthy? And this is just a few random thoughts about it. The IAQ monitors I mentioned before, certification programs will lead to like an AHAM sticker that gets applied to something that can help inform product selection, for instance, or 13 filters in education through labeling and packaging of the filter equipment, etc. So lots of ways to actually achieve increased homebuyer awareness. The one that I think is probably has the most promise is where we can actually detect what the pollutants are in houses with those monitors. So improving the quality of that equipment. So that's all the prepared slides I have. And this is my grandson Cal saying goodbye. But I am available for questions. And Mike, if you want to take over and coach me through showing the panel, we can open it up to questions at your cue.
And Mike,
All right.
when I go through the questions that come in first, I have a whole boatload of questions I want to throw out at Eric whenever we use up the attendee questions.
Okay. All right. Well, Eric, we've got a handful of questions that have come in. I wanted to ask a question for myself first, because on that, not the last slide where he was waving goodbye to us, but the one before that, in your presentation, you cited ASHRAE 62.2, but how do you see IAQ getting any uptake within the IECC, especially for residential? Because I think there are some states that just kind of, or jurisdictions that point to that as opposed to ASHRAE standards. And is the IECC even the right vehicle at all?
I think that the IECC is probably not the right vehicle for it, although I could argue either way. I mean, the IECC is the Energy Conservation Code, right? So it's by nature focused on how do we improve the efficiency of a home. Ventilation requirements, according to ASHRAE 62.2, are to protect occupants for health, health purposes. So you might argue that should go in the residential code, but it's not. So where does it fit, and how do we get it into either one? It's a great question, and I don't have the answer. I guess I think it's gonna. One other thing, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to happen, Mike. It's a great question. I mean, I think what we've seen is that voluntary programs, at first, so I mean, Sam could speak to this too. At first, when we launched Energy Star, that requiring the ASHRAE standard 62 requirement wasn't something we could do. It was a poison pill at the early days because people didn't know what it was. It was too hard to specify. They were worried about moisture problems, etc. So we just couldn't require it. But over the years, as people got used to build tight, ventilate right, and the technology and the specification, and hey, their homes mostly didn't rot out when they ventilated them if you follow best practices, etc. And with the help of Building America teams, etc., we got to the point where, hey, we can figure this out. We can do this ASHRAE standard 62.2 thing. And so there's a lot more uptake of it through the voluntary programs. When does that become a code requirement across the country? I don't know. And because I'm not responsible for the codes, I haven't focused on that question. but it is an interesting one. And incidentally, the Manufactured Housing Code, otherwise known as the HUD code, does have a ventilation requirement built into it. And so that's sort of closer to the IRC. And it does include ventilation requirements. So maybe the IRC is the right place for that. I don't know. It's an interesting question and unanswered at this point.
Okay. I'm going to get some other questions from our audience too. Edward had a question. With the increased popularity of mini splits, especially that localized blower, is it easier to achieve and maintain IAQ with a centralized air distribution system? And he's also wondering if you can comment on kind of just the pros and cons of IAQ with the variety of HVAC systems that are out there.
Oh, it's a great question, and I know that Edward's gonna hate my answer, which is it depends. Because you know what, you can have a good indoor air quality system design with every HVAC system, and you can have a poor indoor air quality design, with every HVAC system. It's possible to poorly implement all of these things. In my experience, the systems that are most likely to be used properly are the ones that are simplest and most straightforward. Kind of gets back to that, if the consumers understand their system, they're more likely to use it properly. So I think that's a really important factor. With regards to mini split, if you're talking about ductless mini splits, of course, they are not, by design, they're serving the needs of a space, not the whole house. So it's most likely that that kind of a system would work best in conjunction with a smaller whole house ventilation system. So for instance, if you are using a central ERV or HRV in conjunction with mini splits for heating and cooling, that's a great way to go. On the other hand, if you have a central HVAC system, you can come up with good ventilation systems that work well also. So, yeah. So sorry, Edward, for for that wishy-washy answer, but it's the truth.
We've got a question from Justin. He's asking about computational fluid dynamics, and yeah. But is computational fluid dynamics aided design? So, helping with the design. Is that a factor being considered in the progression of industry standards for IAQ in commercial and or residential?
I'd say the answer to that question is indirectly, in that there's plenty of computational fluid dynamics that happens in the research space that then filters to the engineering that goes into, designing better distribution systems that achieve proper flow, et cetera. Computational fluid dynamics is a very, computational intensive activity, and it's only as good as the inputs that you put in. So I would be somewhat reluctant to use that from a quantitative perspective to design a system. However, it can be a great tool if you've got a software package that does computational fluid dynamics. It can be a great tool for helping you or your clients to visualize what the airflows are going to look like and why you might specify a certain type of system. And I think that's most useful, honestly, in convincing people not to cut corners on their HVAC system design. So that's a little bit of a sort of a trick answer, but hopefully that helps.
Question from Kevin. Is there fresh air filtration for some of these simple through wall units?
The answer is yes, but we'd have to look at it from a product to product. And the one that I showed, just to be sure, just to be clear, is not commercially available yet. So it'll have a filter in it. It'll take some engineering smarts to get it up to a high filtration level, because a small unit like that, it's kind of hard to get a MERV 13 filter into it. So yeah, so the answer is yes, but you still got to read the specs.
And there already, just to again emphasize, there already are at least 2 or 3 different through-the-wall ERVs on the market. It sounds like the major innovation will be cost savings, although that one from Ukraine is already about 30–40% lower cost than the Luno C. So they're already they're there already for the. It's just I know what the supply chain's like.
And Kevin just adds that his issue is wildfire smoke, as you also referenced in your presentation. So the genesis for his question comes from there. So let's move to Susan's question. She's wondering if you're familiar with GPS ionization systems.
GPS? Like
GPS.
GPS.
No, I'm not. I do know that air cleaning devices that use an ionization process are more likely to create ozone, and ozone created that way is a contaminant. So you got to be careful about anything that uses the ionization process to clean air. I'm not sure about the particular one that Susan mentioned in her question, though.
Yeah, GPS is the company name, but just ionization is just.
Got it.
Yeah, so. Let's go back for a second. We were talking about standards and codes and that sort of thing, and we got a question from Ali. He's curious as to how fast are cities adopting or incorporating these kinds of changes into their codes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The state code adoption, which is the group of code adoption that I know the best, has been pretty slow for most states. Generally 6 years behind the model code or more, which is 2 or 3 code cycles behind, because they're 3-year code cycles. And then many, if not most cities, model their codes after or just flat out adopt the state codes. So I would guess that there would be similar, lagging in the stringency of the codes. So, state-of-the-art model codes at the national level usually they can take anywhere from 1 year for the most aggressive states and cities to, 12 plus years before those are adopted at those levels. I do think, though, that there is a recent trend. This is very recent. There's a recent trend towards cities and states getting more aggressive about climate mitigation goals and targets, et cetera, which is leading to more rapid adoption of more aggressive codes, and these types of issues get addressed through those. And so I think that the pace at which the codes are being adopted at local levels is accelerating, but it's a relatively new trend. So I don't know how fast it's going to go.
Well, I would add to that, Eric, that you've got some states that have adopted net zero carbon types of legislation, and those time horizons vary. 2030, 35, 40, 50. my big question on some of those, without reading every word of the legislation, is what's the penalty if you don't? You know, what if you don't hit the target of we're gonna be net zero carbon as a state by 2040? What's the downside? I mean, what's the penalty? So if you know, that's great. It's an aspiration. You want something you're striving towards. But if there's no penalties in there, and you know, you get a change of heart at some point, and they go, yeah, that thing, but we don't have to worry about it. That's my concern.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think you're right. On the other hand, if everybody did that, and the predictions about what will happen if we miss our targets bad, then many jurisdictions will be impacted by these natural disasters increasing in larger severity, and all it takes is one big natural disaster for there to be enough local demand for the governments to do something. So I think there's a counterbalance that's natural, that's built into this. If it turns out that the predictions of the increase in severity and frequency of these natural disasters goes up as the climate heats up, and we have lots of data to indicate that that's very likely, then I think it'll be self-correcting. But you're right. I mean, human nature is such that if nobody checks and you're not penalized for not meeting a goal, then it's pretty easy to ignore the goal.
Yeah. We have a couple questions that are referencing specifically some slides that you showed. And I would have popped in at the time, but the questions came in later, and it would have kind of thrown off your flow of your presentation. So we have a question from our friend Hap. He says, in your slide where you were comparing electric cooking to gas cooking, he felt that the CFM numbers may have been backwards, because if he was understanding the chart correctly, it looked like you had larger CFM numbers for smaller homes. Was that how it was meant to be interpreted?
The only slide that I have, can I share my screen?
Yeah, you can. Go right ahead.
How do I do that? Okay, there we go. So this is the only slide I have that I actually put CFM in. Is this the one that you think he was referring to, Mike?
I believe so.
Yeah, so what this is saying is that it's a proposed California standard, and it's saying that for an electric stove at, say, in a house that's less than 1,500 square foot, that's the very top row, then the minimum capture efficiency needs to be 0.50 on a scale of 0 to 1. And the minimum airflow of the fan installed has to be 110 CFM. For the same size home that has gas cooking, the minimum capture efficiency has to be 0.70, and the minimum airflow for that range hood has to be 180 CFM. So I don't think it's backwards. It makes rational sense that if there's a larger pollutant source, you're going to want higher airflow and higher capture efficiency.
Yeah, the CFM numbers go up as the floor area decreases.
Oh, I see the question. Okay, that's a different question than what I just answered. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I'm gonna have to go ask
Eric? Eric, it makes sense because the concentration is getting higher in smaller residences, so you probably want to pull out more faster.
Yeah, it does make sense from that regard, but it's a complicated dynamic. So it's a good question. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I think Sam's answer is probably right, because it's a smaller space, so you need a higher airflow in order to remove the concentration.
Sure.
Hey,
And then,
Mike, can I chime in with, because I see time's getting short. I want to get to a few questions that I think are important for actionable.
Am I still showing my screen, or should I?
Yeah, sure. You get rid of it, yeah. And so I'm going to
Okay.
share my screen. I just want to ask a few questions because I think people listening can take action based on the answers to these, Eric. I think it's really important, the advent of really important work from DOE on working to develop a capture efficiency standard and start working with industry. So to what extent can you tell the listeners that the manufacturers use the capture efficiency label and they can start looking for it now? And if not now, when would you think the label be more prevalent so that we can actually use that in making our purchase decision?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't know the exact dates, Sam, but I know that the manufacturers have all been planning for this capture efficiency standard since it made its way through the ASTM process, keeping in mind that there's several layers of standards that affect this. So the ASTM standard was a standard for testing the capture efficiency of a range hood in a laboratory environment so that it can be consistently tested across manufacturers, right? But that doesn't, all that does is tell you that the capture efficiency number for that range hood in a rated condition is X. It doesn't tell you what to specify. So then you need some kind of a certification process, and HVI, the Home Ventilating Institute, is the one that's being used for the capture efficiency metric. And what I don't know, but I could find out, is when capture efficiency will be listed on products through the HVI, certification process. Each of these things, as you can imagine, takes a couple of years. We finished the ASTM standard. HVI has adopted the certification. What I don't know is whether or not they're currently listing products with capture efficiency and how many products have a capture efficiency listed. It's any day now, I think, but I don't know exactly when or how many.
That's the answer. It is pretty soon. Okay.
Yeah.
And so when I see advertisements for some range hoods that say high capture efficiency, it's just a unvalidated claim.
Unspecified, right? So we should be in the very near future asking, where's your HVI label, your certification?
Okay, my next question's in the same vein. I think a lot of people are very interested in these monitors or in the possibility that their home buyers who are health conscious will start acquiring these monitors, yet the accuracy, reliability is way down from where it eventually needs to be. So again, any forecast when we think some of these monitors that we can get on our smartphones or actually displays in our home, when do we think they'll have some sort of, again, be actionable, be useful, be something we can use to monitor to some degree the reasonable health performance of the home? Are we getting within a few years, 5 years? What do you think is a good forecast?
I think that the answer to that is today those can be useful for limited applications, and we have to do it smart. They will get better and better over time, and the way to ensure that we understand whether or not they're better is to look out for standards for those things. Unfortunately, standards take a long time to develop. So
anything in the works?
I would have to check in with my LBL buddies to find out whether or not there's anything in the works. They've tested the equipment. They know what the weaknesses are. They are generally positive about they're kind of at a level where, up until recently, low cost monitors were considered by researchers to be crap, basically.
Right.
And they're not viewing them as crap anymore. They're viewing them as situationally, they can be very useful, but you got to know how to use them, etc. So what I think is going to happen, this is just putting on my soothsayer hat, What I think is going to happen, Sam, is that they're on the market already. People are using them, and right, that's the problem. But it's not a problem that builders have any control over. So what I think we need to do is start to engage with the customers, get smart about what these devices are good for and aren't good for. Right now, the manufacturers of those things are going to want to participate in that so they can improve the quality of their devices. And then you're going to have to use fine print. So my recommendation is develop your fine print after you get smart about what those things can and can't do, and start the conversation with your customers to let them know that these things aren't perfectly accurate, but we want to be in partnership. If you're interested in your indoor air quality, we're committed to helping you manage it as best as you can, and we'll figure out how to help you with education about what you can do and can't do. And the fine print has to be there because you've got to protect your legal liability.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question. I don't want builders to be afraid of indoor air quality because people are running around trying to measure it.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's like the question came up in a conversation I had recently of why in the world would a builder want to give a consumer a low-cost monitor when it might tell them there's it might have a false positive until and then you're going to get lots of complaints, etc. And my answer to that, after I thought about it for a while, is you know what, you might not be able to avoid those calls because people are going to buy them anyway, right?
Get ahead of it and provide a fine print.
Exactly.
Yeah, I will mention though, I remember Brett Singer saying the FluBot was a pretty good low-cost option if you had to pick the sensors. That seemed to be the one that made you the.
I've heard him say things about FluBot that weren't perfect, so I would be reluctant to support that. On the other hand, since I'm a government official, I
been there, done that.
I can't name a brand, even if I had a choice.
Yes.
I wouldn't mind fiddling around with the FluBot and see how it works in my home and see if it's helpful, or Air Advice or the Grey Wolf or any of these other ones that are out there. I think they're probably all okay, but just like any measurement device, if you don't calibrate it, it can be wrong, right?
Well, I used to be a government official, and since I'm not, I wanted to share Brett's guidance, but to some extent, even some caveats. Two more quick questions, because I don't want to lose you on a couple of things. One that really concerns me, where your pictures showing the vents for the intakes, and those locations were egregious because no way to measure, to maintain. And so we know that the vent's going to get clogged with debris, with hornets' nests, with whatever. It's unavoidable. Every vent in my house I check every year, and it's amazing what you find in terms of need for maintenance. So since we know the ventilation system effectiveness will shut down if the intakes are clogged for whatever reasons, is there any move to, in Air Plus or other programs, I know they locate the distance apart, intakes and exhaust vents can't be within proximity, but is there also a requirement either now or in the future to make sure location is one that can be maintained without significant effort?
Good question, Sam. There is a provision for maintainability of ventilation systems, but I don't think that inlets or outlets are specifically mentioned. I think it needs to be in a standard, and it needs to be in the installation instructions for the fan, etc. So you raise a great point. That's one of those things where I'm sure it's been proposed. Why it's not in the standard right now, I'm not sure. Would require some digging around, would require some advocacy. I mean, the more we find these problems, the more likely they're going to become part of the standard. And that's one of the reasons why it's an interesting sort of thing. It's one of the reasons why I'm a big proponent of making low-cost measurement more common, because if you have an onboard flow sensor that just sends a little warning that says, hey, it's lower than it was when you installed it, then you or whoever does your maintenance knows you got to go check it. And that's going to lead to more awareness about those problems, which then I would hope would, lead to better standards about how to avoid those problems more regularly. But you're right, it's a glaring problem right now in the industry and in the standards. We don't have the technology or the standards to support reliable preventative maintenance.
The last question I have is, again, the builders can do a great job and integrate all these wonderful best practices for air quality, but there's a whole plethora of bad behavior the occupants can start taking on once they move on that negates or creates issues. So is there some sort of guidance document we either can think of preparing for builders to hand over to homeowners how to maintain a healthy house? It could be simple things like avoiding furniture with really nasty fire retardants, good policies like not wearing shoes in their home, vacuuming carpets at least once, twice a week, or whatever it may be, changing filters, cleaning gutters. It's all the usual things that will exacerbate the good things we do that you laid out today, but the owner is going to be the culprit if they don't have good things.
So what that makes me think about is that surely all of those recommendations are written down in various places. And I would first go to my buddies at EPA in the Indoor Environments Division, Nick Hurst, and say, hey, Nick, what do we got in the way of guidance that a builder could just slap into their homeowner's manual, right? And that would be the best way to go, because that's their mission for Indoor Air Plus, is to help, because they know that Indoor Air Plus by itself, it's specifications for the home, but it stops at turning over the keys to the homeowner. So I would think that they'd have a list of all the things that consumers or homeowners can do with their homes. I just don't know if they have put it all into one place. So it'd be a really good idea to bug them for it.
Yeah, that would be great. And I just take this chance to just put that in your brain for now. Mike, we're hitting 3:30, so I'm going to let you pull a wrap on today's session. We've abused Eric even beyond what I thought we would do, so I want to let him go. But I did want to squeeze some questions in, you know me.
Well, thanks for having me, Sam and Mike, and I really appreciated the opportunity to, to chat with you guys. In parting, I still feel frustrated talking to a screen. I mean, I would much rather talk to you all directly and hear your questions directly, but I guess this is where we are today, right?
It's only been a couple of years. Give it a chance.
Yeah.
Well, I know we are at the end of your time, Eric, so we really do appreciate you coming over here and talking to us, and for all of us being able to just listen in on your conversation here at the end. Really appreciate it. Thank you also to our audience for attending today, asking wonderful questions, and thank you to Mitsubishi Electric, Westlake Royal Building Products, and Schneider Electric for the generous sponsorship of the Housing 2.0 program. Now, if you enjoyed today's webinar, and why wouldn't you, and you'd like to learn more about the Housing 2.0 strategies, you can register now for the second workshop series. That 6-part series is going to begin on Thursday, May 26th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And yeah, there's that book.
I'm studying.
All you got to do. All you got to do is go to greenbuildermedia.com/housing-2.0. 2.0. And now Sam owes Eric a check for $20. Before that starts, though, right after, I should say, that workshop series starts up, we're going to be back here again on June 8th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time for another webinar in our Thought Leader series. We're going to be joined by Alan Lang from RIA to talk more about the future of comfort in our homes. So thank you once again for joining us. Until next time, take care, everyone.
Thank you so much.